A fake doctor kills his whole family. A nurse strangles a hitman. And a pilot tries to crash a plane with 80 people on board. You think you know what evil looks like? A masked intruder. A shadow in a dark alley. A villain in a story. But what if it's your husband, hiring a hitman to kill you? Or the charming friend, who faked being a doctor for 18 years, before murdering his entire family? And what if the man trusted to fly your plane suddenly tries to bring it down, because he thinks he's dreaming? These aren't movie scripts. They happened. And today, we're diving into 3 real-life stories so twisted, they'll leave you questioning not just others, but your own instincts. The twists in these stories will challenge everything you think you know about the world, leaving you questioning, how could these things really happen? The first story will immerse you in a world of lies, unraveling a man's carefully constructed life. Jean-Claude Romand, the fake doctor and his deadly lies. Jean-Claude Romand is a French man infamous for living a fabricated life as a medical doctor and researcher with the World Health Organization, WHO, for 18 years, only to later murder his wife, children, and parents in 1993 when his deception was on the verge of being exposed. His story is not just one of a man who lied for decades, but also one of unimaginable tragedy, betrayal, and the haunting consequences that such lies bring. Born on February 11, 1954, in Lons-le-Saunier, France, Romand's life began like many others. He enrolled in medical school with hopes of becoming a doctor, but fate took a dark turn early on. In his first year of medical school, Romand failed his exams, an event that would set the stage for his elaborate scheme of deceit. Rather than admitting his failure, Romand began to construct an intricate web of lies. He told his family, friends, and even acquaintances that he had passed his exams, continuing his medical studies as a top student. When he wasn't attending class, he claimed to be working at the WHO, where he supposedly contributed to groundbreaking research. Over time, Romand's deception became more convincing. He pretended to be a researcher at the World Health Organization in Geneva, a position that lent him the credibility he needed to deceive not just his family but an entire network of close friends. He fabricated stories of his work, claiming to be engaged in cutting-edge research on heart disease and other serious medical conditions. Romand's wife, Florence, believed every word, and proudly told her friends that her husband was a brilliant, accomplished doctor. His life appeared perfect from the outside, yet beneath the surface, it was built on a foundation of lies. Romand continued his false life for almost 2 decades. To maintain the illusion of success, he would travel frequently, pretending to attend conferences or international meetings. These trips were nothing but ruses to hide the fact that he had no real career or job. He would drive around the border region between France and Switzerland, sometimes stopping at motels, where he would stay for a few days and then return home with gifts for his family. Despite this, he lived off the money he had borrowed from friends and family. He even sold his student apartment in Lyon, using the proceeds to sustain the illusion of a successful career. However, the lies began to unravel in the early 1990s. As Romand continued to ask his family and friends for money, citing his supposed role at the WHO and his ability to invest in lucrative opportunities, he started to run out of funds. His debts mounted, and his friends and family started asking questions. It wasn't long before some of his victims began researching his background. The truth was shocking. Romand's name was nowhere to be found on the official WHO staff list. The man who had portrayed himself as an accomplished doctor and researcher was, in fact, nothing more than a fraud. On January 9, 1993, the pressure of his unraveling lies became too much for Romand. His financial schemes were falling apart, and he knew it was only a matter of time before his facade was exposed. Fearing the ruin that would come with his exposure, he decided to take extreme measures to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. In a brutal act of desperation, Romand murdered his wife, Florence, and their 2 children, Caroline and Antoine. The following day, he turned on his parents, Am and Anne-Marie Romand, killing them as well. The horror didn't end there. Romand had also borrowed money from a former mistress, and when she demanded repayment, he attempted to murder her as well. Fortunately, she survived the attack. Romand then set fire to his house in an attempt to cover up the murders and make it appear as if the family had died in a tragic accident. He overdosed on sleeping pills in a failed suicide attempt. However, firefighters were able to rescue him from the burning house, and he was later arrested. Romand was arrested and put on trial for the murders of his wife, children, and parents. In 1996, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment with a 22-year minimum sentence. The trial was a spectacle, drawing attention from the media and the public, all of whom were horrified by the extent of his deception and the grisly murders. During his time in prison, Romand showed a strange form of remorse for his actions. He spent much of his time engaged in audio restoration work for the National Audiovisual Institute, INA, and even trained fellow inmates in the same skill. Despite his horrific crimes, Romand seemed to adapt to prison life, quietly blending in with the other prisoners. After serving 26 years of his life sentence, Romand became eligible for parole in 2015. In 2019, he was granted conditional release and placed under electronic monitoring at the Notre Dame de Font-Gambalt Abbey, a Benedictine monastery in central France. Romand lived there for 2 years, participating in the daily routines of the monks, which included agricultural work. Romand's release in 2022 marked the end of his lengthy prison sentence, though he remains under certain legal restrictions. He now lives in a small village in the Indre department, leading a modest life on a pension. His life, once filled with lies and deceit, has now been reduced to an existence of quiet seclusion. Romand is prohibited from making media appearances and is banned from contacting the families of his victims. The story of Jean-Claude Romand has captivated many and has been the subject of several cultural works. French author Emmanuel Carrère wrote L'Adversaire, The Adversary, which delves deeply into Romand's life, exploring the complexities of his psyche and the depth of his deception. The book was later adapted into a film in 2002, bringing Romand's story to a wider audience. In addition to the book and film, Romand's case has inspired episodes in television series such as Waking the Dead and Law and Order, Criminal Intent, where his story of deception and murder has been explored in dramatic fashion. His story continues to be a chilling reminder of the dark potential that lies within human nature and the devastating impact of lies on those around us. As Romand moves forward with his life, the emotional impact of his crimes reverberates through the lives of the people he deceived. For his wife and children, the lies ended in tragedy, and for the families of the murdered victims, the scars of their loss are permanent. Romand's life of lies and eventual exposure serves as a warning. Truth, no matter how deeply hidden, has a way of coming to the surface, often with devastating consequences. Susan Coonhausen, The Fight for Survival. Susan Coonhausen's life would never be the same after that fateful day. The ordinary routine of her day-to-day existence, where she worked as an emergency room nurse, was shattered in an instant, her world turned upside down by a violent act of betrayal and a fight for survival. Her story of survival begins not in the halls of a hospital, but in the quiet confines of her own home. It was a seemingly normal afternoon when Susan pulled into her driveway after a long day at work. She had stopped at a hair salon, her mind preoccupied with the ongoing struggles in her marriage. Her husband, Mike, had become distant, and the tension between them had reached a breaking point. The two had been married for 18 years, but their relationship had soured, with arguments growing more frequent and harsh. Susan had finally gathered the courage to confront Mike, telling him that she wanted a divorce. Mike's refusal had only made the situation worse, leading to bitter fights that left her feeling emotionally drained. Susan returned to her home, hoping for some peace, but as she entered, she noticed something was off. The house, usually so full of the sounds of everyday life, felt unnervingly silent. There was no sign of her husband, but a note was left for her. It read, "Sue, I've had trouble sleeping. I've gone to the beach. I'll see you in a couple of days." Something about the note didn't sit right with Susan. She thought it odd that Mike, in the middle of their conflict, would take off without a word or explanation. But the real shock came when she ventured further into the house. As Susan made her way through the hallway toward the kitchen, she noticed a strange darkness in one of the rooms, a room that was typically bathed in light. It felt too dark, too quiet. Her instincts, honed through years of experience as a nurse, told her that something wasn't right. She cautiously turned, her eyes scanning the dimly lit guest room. It was then that the figure appeared. A man she had never seen before stepped out from behind the bedroom door. He was medium height, wearing a hat pulled low over his face, yellow rubber gloves on his hands, and holding a hammer. He began walking toward her, and in that moment, the reality of what was happening hit Susan hard. It was hard for anyone to believe what came next. Most people would have frozen, overwhelmed with fear, but not Susan. Her years of experience in the emergency room had prepared her for moments like this. She'd seen everything: heart attacks, trauma, violence, but nothing had prepared her for a situation like this. In that split second, Susan's training kicked in. She charged at the intruder, her heart racing, but her mind focused. Her body moved instinctively, powered by adrenaline. She collided with him, slamming him against the wall with surprising force for someone of her stature. He struck her once with the hammer, but Susan barely flinched. Her mind raced, the noise of her heart pounding in her ears, but she didn't stop. She had to act. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to make sense of the situation. "What do you want?" But the man said nothing, his intent clear as he raised the hammer once more. Susan knew that this was no ordinary robbery. This man had one goal: her death. The realization struck like a lightning bolt, fueling her determination to survive. The fight for survival was brutal. Susan grabbed the hammer from his hands, pulling it away and using it to strike him in the head. She wasn't a fighter by profession, but her instincts, sharpened by years of dealing with life-or-death situations in the ER, guided her. She was relentless, determined not to let this man take her life. But the intruder wasn't giving up easily. He lunged at her again, but this time, she was ready. Susan had the upper hand for a moment, but when the man reached for the hammer again, she made a decision. It was clear that if she didn't act now, she might not live to see another day. She grabbed his throat, squeezing tighter with each passing second, as she struggled to choke the life out of him. The man's face turned red, then purple, his attempts to loosen her grip growing weaker. It was then that Susan made a chilling realization: if she didn't stop, she might end up killing him. The situation escalated further when, in a final attempt to escape, the man tripped her to the ground. As Susan fell, she looked up to see him above her, ready to bring the hammer down. But this wasn't the end. Susan, fueled by a sheer will to survive, acted fast. She bit down hard on his leg, breaking the fabric of his pants and drawing a scream of pain from him. Her bite was enough to stagger him, giving her just enough time to regain control. She shoved him to the ground, landing on top of him, and with a swift motion, locked her arms around his throat, choking him until he finally went limp. When the struggle was over, Susan stood, her breath ragged but steady. She grabbed the hammer, a symbol of the terrifying ordeal she had just survived, and calmly walked out of her house. She knocked on her neighbor's door, holding the hammer in her hand, covered in blood but composed. Her neighbor, taken aback by her appearance, led her inside, where Susan made a single call to the police. She had survived. The police arrived, confirming the man's death. His identity was revealed to be Ed Haffey, a 59-year-old Vietnam veteran with a history of violent behavior. Upon searching his belongings, the police discovered a notebook that contained instructions to contact Mike, Susan's husband. It became clear that Mike had hired Ed to kill his wife, paying him $50,000 to do the job. The betrayal stung. Mike, once the man she loved, had not only allowed a stranger into their home but had gone as far as hiring him to end her life. The discovery of her husband's role in the plot was a devastating blow to Susan, but she wasn't going to let it break her. She took legal action, suing Mike for $1 million, determined to ensure that he couldn't use his newfound wealth to hire another hitman to finish the job. Mike's fate wasn't a happy one. He was arrested, tried for soliciting the murder of his wife, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. But before Susan could even begin to process the emotional toll of the attack, Mike died in prison, his life extinguished by his own choices. Susan, meanwhile, emerged from the ordeal not only as a survivor but as a hero, hailed for her strength and resilience in the face of betrayal and violence. The emotional scars would take time to heal, but Susan's determination to survive and her ability to protect herself in the face of certain death were testaments to the strength of the human spirit. The attack was not just a physical battle but an emotional one that Susan would carry with her for the rest of her life. But despite the trauma, she had won. Bibbo, the Sky King in his fatal stunts. In October 2023, an off-duty Alaska Airlines pilot, Joseph David Emerson, attempted to disable the engines of a Horizon Air flight mid-flight, leading to his arrest and subsequent charges. Date and flight details. On October 22, 2023, Horizon Air Flight 2059, operated by Alaska Airlines, was en route from Everett, Washington, to San Francisco. The aircraft, an Embraer E-175, was carrying 79 passengers and 5 crew members. The flight had a seemingly routine takeoff from Everett, but what happened in the skies above the Pacific Northwest would defy belief. The attempted sabotage. While seated in the cockpit's jump seat, Emerson allegedly pulled the fire suppression handles for both engines, which would have cut off fuel and potentially caused engine failure. The fire suppression system is designed to extinguish fires in an engine by cutting off its fuel supply, which, if triggered intentionally, would lead to catastrophic consequences mid-flight. The flight crew quickly intervened, resetting the systems and restraining Emerson. The plane was diverted to Portland, Oregon, where Emerson was arrested without incident. His actions, though brief, had already shaken the passengers, and their terrifying flight experience was over. Still, the question lingered: how could someone with his background commit such an act? Mental health struggles. Emerson, 44, had been dealing with depression and had recently experienced the death of a close friend. He admitted to taking psychedelic mushrooms 2 days before the flight in an attempt to cope with his grief. Emerson later described the incident as a result of a nervous breakdown, stating he felt trapped and believed he was dreaming. His decision to take psychedelic substances may have been an attempt to escape his emotional pain, but it ended up leading him into a state of psychosis where he made a tragic choice that could have cost many lives. He later expressed remorse, describing his actions as a result of an overwhelming mental breakdown that clouded his judgment entirely. Professional history. Emerson had been a pilot for Alaska Airlines since 2016, following the airline's acquisition of Virgin America, where he had worked since 2012. He had a history of mental health challenges and had recently undergone a psychological screening in September 2023. Despite his qualifications, his mental health struggles remained largely unchecked, with significant consequences for both his career and the safety of others. Emerson's past also showed a history of inconsistent behavior. This lack of adequate oversight raises concerns about the effectiveness of mental health evaluations in the aviation industry, particularly when it comes to addressing mental health crises before they escalate to catastrophic levels. Charges. Emerson was indicted on 1 count of endangering an aircraft in the first degree and 83 counts of recklessly endangering another person, corresponding to the number of individuals aboard the flight. The grand jury declined to pursue attempted murder charges. The severity of the charges reflected the gravity of his actions, potentially bringing the plane down with no regard for the lives of the people aboard. Still, the decision not to pursue murder charges was a surprising turn, as the intent to cause harm was clear to anyone following the developments. Current status. As of August 2024, Emerson has pleaded not guilty to the charges and is awaiting trial. He has expressed deep regret for his actions and is seeking therapy and recovery. The road to recovery for Emerson will likely be long, with both legal and personal challenges. The public's opinion on his actions remains divided, with some viewing him as a victim of his own mental health struggles, while others see him as a dangerous individual who nearly caused an aviation disaster. Passenger lawsuits. Several passengers have filed lawsuits against Alaska Airlines and Horizon Air, alleging that the airlines failed to ensure the safety of those aboard by allowing an off-duty pilot with access to the cockpit. The legal fallout from the incident could lead to significant changes in the way off-duty pilots are treated in terms of access to aircraft. Airlines may face heightened scrutiny over how they vet their employees for mental health stability and whether they should restrict cockpit access to off-duty personnel. Mental health scrutiny. The incident has prompted renewed discussions about the mental health of aviation personnel. While the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, allows pilots to seek treatment for certain mental health conditions without automatic disqualification. The use of psychedelic substances is not currently tested for in routine drug screenings. This raises a critical point about the limitations of the FAA's current mental health guidelines and the potential gaps in addressing the mental well-being of pilots, especially those experiencing mental health crises. Experts argue that the airline industry must do more to prevent situations like Emerson's from happening again by introducing stricter monitoring of pilots' mental health, especially in cases where psychiatric medications or substances are involved. The conversations surrounding Bibo's flight, like those involving other high-profile cases, have pushed the airline industry to reconsider its practices for ensuring safety at all levels. The accessibility of such dangerous aircraft components, combined with the mental health challenges faced by some pilots, has exposed significant vulnerabilities in aviation safety. The story of Bibo's tragic end and his unexpected aerial stunts serves as a reminder of just how fine the line is between aviation mastery and disaster. Despite being untrained, Bibo somehow navigated the skies with the skill of an expert, leading many to speculate about his previous experiences with flight simulations or his natural aptitude for control. His story raises more questions than answers, making him a figure of intense curiosity for those who have followed the incident closely. The emotional journey behind Bibo's flight was not just one of technical maneuvering, it was an unraveling of his own internal struggles. It revealed a man who, at his core, was deeply troubled, struggling with inner demons, and in search of something more than what his life could provide. The three stories we've explored are vivid reminders of just how bizarre, unsettling, and unexpected life can be. They remind us that truth can often defy the most outlandish of fictional plots, leaving us questioning our perceptions of reality and morality. These narratives, each dramatic in its own right, unfold in ways that challenge our assumptions about human nature, survival, and deception. In the first story, the betrayal of trust by an off-duty pilot aboard a commercial flight demonstrates how a single moment of instability can ripple through many lives. Emerson's reckless actions aboard the Horizon Air flight reveal the terrifying vulnerability of human nature when mental health falters. What started as a deeply personal struggle for Emerson turned into a public spectacle of danger and survival. The crew and passengers, working against time and uncertainty, quickly intervened, preventing what could have been a tragic disaster. But what stands out in this tale is not just the sheer recklessness of the act, but the deeper reflection it prompts about the fragility of trust in high-stakes environments. It forces us to confront the question of how much we really know about those around us, and whether our systems, however well-intentioned, can ever truly predict the unpredictable. Then we shift to the second tale, where a woman's life was nearly cut short by someone closest to her. Susan's story is a powerful reminder of the darkness that can sometimes lurk within the most familiar faces. The man she loved and trusted with her life, her husband, plotted her murder, manipulating a stranger into executing the crime. In the face of death, Susan did not simply survive, she fought back with an intensity born from her years of training as a nurse. Her resilience, her inner strength, served as a testament to the unpredictable nature of survival when pushed to the edge. Her story challenges the very concept of safety and trust. How could the person she once shared her life with become her greatest threat? And what does it say about human nature that, under extreme pressure, people can either crumble or rise, sometimes in ways that leave us breathless with astonishment? Finally, we delve into the strange and unsettling story of Bibo, whose actions in the sky stunned onlookers and challenged our understanding of human potential and recklessness. Bibo, a ground service agent with no formal training, managed to take control of a commercial airplane and perform aerial stunts that most trained pilots would hesitate to try. His skillful maneuvers, backflips, barrel rolls, suggested a mind that had been quietly absorbing knowledge from video games, or perhaps, a deep well of curiosity about the mechanics of flight. But beneath the awe of his aerial performance lay a tragic reality, a man who, in his own words, was broken. Bibo's flight challenges the very essence of truth versus fiction. How did he manage to pull off such extraordinary stunts with no formal experience, and more profoundly, why did he do it? Bibo's story forces us to consider the depths of human isolation, and the unpredictable ways in which desperation can lead to extraordinary, yet tragic, outcomes. These stories each showcase the thin line between truth and fiction, where the real-life events are often stranger and more complex than anything fiction could ever invent. They reflect on human nature, our desires, our fears, and the lengths we will go to, whether to survive, to deceive, or to escape. They challenge us to reconsider the boundaries of morality, trust, and survival, pushing us to question how we view others, and ourselves, in moments of crisis. As you reflect on these tales, ask yourself, what would you do if faced with such extreme situations? How far are we willing to go when we are pushed to our limits? The truth of these stories, though uncomfortable, may just reveal more about the human condition than any fiction ever could.